The fluorescent lights in Dr. Rodriguez's office buzzed overhead as I sat on the crinkly paper of the examination table, my hands trembling slightly as I described the symptoms that had been plaguing me for months. Outside the window of the medical building on Fifth Street, Chicago's autumn wind rattled glass, and I could see people hurrying past in their coats, completely unaware that my world was about to shatter. "The fatigue isn't normal tired," I explained to Dr. Rodriguez, a kind woman in her 50s who actually listened when I spoke. "It's like someone unplugged me from the wall. And the weight loss, I've dropped 20 pounds without trying. My clothes hang off me like I'm a scarecrow." She nodded thoughtfully, making notes on her tablet. "Tell me about the night sweats, Rebecca." "Every night for the past 6 weeks. I wake up soaked, like I've been running a marathon in my sleep. And the lumps, I touch my neck gently. They're getting bigger." Dr. Rodriguez set down her tablet and moved closer, her experienced hands gently palpating the lymph nodes in my neck, under my arms, and my collarbone area. Her expression remained professionally neutral, but I caught something flickering in her eyes: concern, maybe even alarm. "Rebecca, I'm going to order some tests today. Blood work, imaging studies. I want you to get these done as soon as possible." The urgency in her voice made my stomach drop. "What do you think it could be?" "Let's wait for the results before we speculate," she said gently, but her tone told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't going to be good news. As I walked out of the medical building into the crisp Chicago air, my phone buzzed with a text from David. "Still at your dramatic doctor visit? Dinner at 7. Don't be late." I stared at the message, feeling a familiar knot form in my stomach. David had been dismissive about my health concerns for months, calling me a hypochondriac when I mentioned feeling unwell. "You're always finding something wrong with yourself," he'd say with that condescending smile that made me feel small and foolish. At 40 years old, I'd learned to trust my body. I'd survived a difficult divorce in my 30s, built a successful career as a marketing director, and raised my teenage daughter, Jessica, mostly on my own after her father moved to California. I knew the difference between normal stress and something being seriously wrong. But David had a way of making me question myself. He was charming when he wanted to be successful in his finance job, and everyone at his company parties thought we were the perfect couple. Behind closed doors, though, every concern I voiced was met with eye rolls and sighs. "You're being dramatic again," had become his favorite phrase. That evening, over dinner at our usual Italian place on Michigan Avenue, I tried to tell him about the doctor's visit. The restaurant was warm and inviting, with soft lighting and the comforting smell of garlic and herbs, but I felt cold inside. "She's ordering a lot of tests," I said, picking at my pasta. "CT scans, more blood work." She seemed really concerned about the lymph nodes. David barely looked up from his phone, scrolling through work emails. "Doctors always order tests. It's how they make money. You probably just need to sleep more and stress less." "David, I'm losing weight without trying. That's not normal." He finally looked at me, and I saw that familiar expression of impatience cross his face. "Rebecca, you've been complaining about being tired for months. Maybe if you exercised more instead of running to doctors every time you feel a little off." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "A little off? I can barely get through a work day without needing to lie down." "You're always finding something to worry about. Remember last year when you were convinced you had a thyroid problem? Turned out to be nothing." The dismissal in his voice made me want to scream. But I'd learned that arguing with David was pointless. He had a talent for making me feel like I was overreacting to everything, like my feelings and concerns were invalid. That night, lying in bed while David slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the distant hum of traffic on Lake Shore Drive. My body felt heavy and foreign, like it belonged to someone else. The night sweats would start soon. They always did around 2 a.m., and I'd wake up drenched and disoriented. I thought about my daughter Jessica, away at Northwestern, brilliant and ambitious and everything I'd hoped she'd become. What would I tell her if these tests confirmed what I was starting to fear? How do you prepare an 18-year-old for the possibility that her mother might be seriously ill? The next few days crawled by. I went through the motions at work, attending meetings and reviewing marketing campaigns, but my mind was elsewhere. My colleagues at the downtown advertising agency where I worked started commenting on how thin I looked, asking if I was feeling okay. Their genuine concern was such a stark contrast to David's dismissiveness that it made me realize how isolated I'd become in my own relationship. When Dr. Rodriguez's office called to schedule a follow-up appointment for the next week, the nurse's voice was carefully professional. "Dr. Rodriguez would like to discuss your results in person," she said. "Can you come in Friday afternoon?" I knew then that my fears were about to be confirmed. Good news comes over the phone. Bad news requires a face-to-face conversation. Friday afternoon, I sat in that same examination room, but this time I wasn't alone. Against my better judgment, I'd asked David to come with me. He'd sighed and rearranged his schedule, making it clear that he considered this an inconvenience. "This better be quick," he muttered, checking his watch for the third time. "I have a client call at 4. Dr. Rodriguez entered the room with a thick folder in her hands and a grave expression on her face. She sat down across from us, and I felt David shift impatiently beside me. "Rebecca," she began gently, "I'm afraid the results aren't what we hoped for." The words seemed to echo in the small examination room as Dr. Rodriguez opened the folder containing my test results. Through the window, I could see the Chicago skyline in the distance, people going about their normal Friday afternoon routines, completely unaware that my life was about to be divided into before and after this moment. "The lymph node biopsy and imaging studies confirm that you have non-Hodgkin's lymphoma," Dr. Rodriguez said gently, her kind eyes focused on mine. "It's an aggressive form, stage 4, which means it has spread to multiple areas of your body." The room seemed to tilt slightly. I heard the words, but they felt surreal, like she was talking about someone else. Stage 4. The phrase hung in the air like a death sentence. What does that mean exactly? I managed to ask, my voice sounding strange and distant. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward, her manner both professional and compassionate. "It means we need to start treatment immediately. We're looking at aggressive chemotherapy, possibly radiation. With treatment, we can work to manage this and give you quality time. But I won't lie to you. Rebecca, this is serious." "How much time?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Every case is different. With treatment, some patients live for years. Without treatment, she paused, choosing her words carefully, we might be looking at months. I felt like I was drowning, like the air had been sucked out of the room. Beside me, David was silent, and when I turned to look at him, I expected to see shock, fear, maybe even the beginning of supportive concern. Instead, I saw irritation. "So what you're saying," David said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of skepticism, "is that Rebecca has cancer, but it's treatable, right? I mean, people beat cancer all the time." Dr. Rodriguez looked at him with barely concealed surprise. "Mr. Patterson, your wife has a very serious diagnosis. Stage 4 lymphoma is life-threatening. The treatment will be intensive and difficult, and she's going to need tremendous support. But she'll be fine, right?" David pressed, as if he could argue the cancer away. "I mean, she looks fine. She's been working, going out to dinner. This seems pretty sudden." I stared at him in disbelief. Even now, faced with a terminal diagnosis, he was questioning it, minimizing it, making it seem like I was overreacting. "David," I said quietly, "did you not hear what she just said? Stage 4 cancer." He turned to me with that look I knew so well, the one that said I was being dramatic again. "Rebecca, you're getting upset. Let's just focus on the treatment and not panic about worst-case scenarios." Dr. Rodriguez intervened, her voice firm. "Mr. Patterson, I think you need to understand the gravity of this situation. Rebecca has been experiencing symptoms for months that you've apparently dismissed. This is not a minor health issue. This is cancer and it's advanced. Look, doctor, David said, his tone becoming defensive. Rebecca worries about everything. She's always running to doctors for headaches, fatigue, every little thing. How was I supposed to know this was different? The callousness in his voice was like a physical blow. Here I was, receiving the worst news of my life, and he was making excuses, defending himself instead of offering support. The symptoms were different, I said, my voice growing stronger despite my shock. I told you I was losing weight, that I couldn't sleep, that something was wrong. You called me a hypochondriac. You're being dramatic again, David said, and the familiar phrase hit me like a slap. Dr. Rodriguez looked between us, her expression shifting from professional concern to something approaching alarm. Rebecca, do you have other family members who can be part of your support system? Your treatment is going to be demanding, and you'll need people around you who understand the seriousness of what you're facing. I have my daughter, I said, thinking of Jessica. She's at Northwestern, and my sister lives in Milwaukee. Good. You're going to need all the support you can get. Dr. Rodriguez handed me a thick packet of information. This contains everything about your diagnosis, treatment options, and support resources. I want you to take the weekend to process this, and we'll meet on Monday to discuss your treatment plan. As we left the medical building, David was already on his phone, talking to someone about rescheduling his client call. I walked beside him in a daze, carrying the heavy folder that contained my death sentence. Well, that was intense, David said when he finished his call, as if we'd just sat through a difficult movie. But at least now we know what we're dealing with. You'll do the chemo and everything will be fine. I stopped walking. We were standing on the sidewalk outside the medical building, with people streaming past us on their way to weekend plans, to normal lives that didn't include words like stage 4 and aggressive treatment. David, did you hear anything she said in there? Of course I did. You have lymphoma. It's treatable with chemotherapy. It's going to be rough for a while, but you'll get through it. She said some patients live for years. Years, David. Not decades. Years. He waved his hand dismissively. Doctors always give you the worst-case scenario to cover themselves legally. You're young, you're strong. You'll be fine. The casual way he brushed off my diagnosis, the complete lack of empathy or fear, or even basic human concern, was like seeing him clearly for the first time. This man, who I'd been with for 2 years, who I'd moved in with 6 months ago, who I'd thought might be my future, was treating my cancer diagnosis like a minor inconvenience. I might die, David, I said quietly. Don't be so dramatic, Rebecca. You're not going to die. People get cancer all the time and they're fine. And there it was again. Dramatic. The word he used to dismiss every feeling I had, every concern I voiced, every time I dared to suggest that my experience mattered. Standing there on that busy Chicago sidewalk, holding a folder full of information about my terminal illness, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just the cancer diagnosis, though that was terrifying enough. It was the sudden, crystal-clear realization that I was completely alone in this relationship. I had spent 2 years walking on eggshells around this man, second-guessing my own feelings, wondering if I really was too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. But cancer isn't dramatic. Stage 4 lymphoma isn't an overreaction. It's real, it's serious, and it might kill me. And the man who was supposed to love me, support me, stand by me through the worst crisis of my life, was telling me I was being dramatic about having cancer. That night I called Jessica. Hearing her voice, young and bright and full of life, made the tears I'd been holding back all day finally come. Mom, what's wrong? You sound weird. Honey, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be hard to hear. I told her everything, the symptoms, the tests, the diagnosis. Unlike David, she grasped the severity immediately. Oh my God, Mom. Oh my God. I'm coming home. I'm driving home right now. Jessica, you don't need to. Yes, I do. You have cancer. You have fucking cancer, and I'm coming home. Her fierce love, her immediate understanding of what this meant, was such a contrast to David's dismissal that I broke down completely. Mom, where's David? Is he there with you? I looked across the living room where David was watching TV, occasionally glancing at his phone, acting like this was just another Friday night. He's here, but I struggled to find the words to explain what I was only just beginning to understand myself. But what? He thinks I'm being dramatic. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. He thinks you're being dramatic about having cancer? Yeah. Mom, what the fuck is wrong with him? It was a good question, and one I was finally ready to ask myself. Jessica arrived home Saturday evening with her car packed full of laundry and textbooks. Her face streaked with tears. She'd been crying during the 3-hour drive from Evanston. When she walked through the door of the Lincoln Park apartment I shared with David, she took one look at me and wrapped me in the fiercest hug I'd received in months. I'm so scared, Mom, she whispered against my shoulder, and her honesty about her fear was more comforting than any of David's dismissive reassurances had been. David emerged from the bedroom where he'd been on a work call, looking mildly annoyed at the interruption. Jessica, I didn't know you were coming home this weekend. My mom has cancer, Jessica said, pulling back from our embrace but keeping one arm around me. Where else would I be? Right, well, she's going to be fine. The doctors have treatments for this stuff now. I watched Jessica's face as she processed David's casual tone, the way he talked about my diagnosis like it was a mild inconvenience. Her expression shifted from grief to confusion to something approaching disgust. She's going to be fine? Jessica repeated slowly. David, she has stage 4 cancer. Do you understand what that means? It means she needs treatment, which she'll get, and then life will go back to normal, David said, settling into his recliner with his laptop. You don't need to be so dramatic about it. The word hit the room like a bomb. Jessica's mouth actually fell open. Dramatic, she said, her voice rising. You think I'm being dramatic because I'm upset that my mother might die. No one's dying, David said firmly, not looking up from his laptop screen. Rebecca's always been anxious about health stuff. She'll do the chemo, she'll be fine, and we can all stop acting like the world is ending. I sat down heavily on the couch, feeling like I was watching this conversation happen to someone else. Jessica sat beside me, her young face flushed with anger. Mom, how long has he been like this? Like what? Like dismissive, about everything you feel. It was a question I'd never asked myself directly, but the answer came immediately. Always, I said quietly. From the beginning. The weekend continued in this surreal fashion. While Jessica helped me research treatment centers and support groups, David maintained his attitude that everyone was overreacting. When I mentioned that I might need to take extended leave from work for treatment, he suggested I was being premature. When Jessica asked if I had a will, he actually rolled his eyes. You're both acting like she's already dead, he said. This negative thinking isn't helping anyone. Sunday afternoon, my sister, Claire, drove down from Milwaukee. She'd been crying on and off since I'd called her with the news the night before, and when she walked into the apartment, she looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. How are you holding up? She asked, studying my face with the intensity only a sister can manage. I'm scared, I admitted, but I'm angrier than I am scared, which is weird. Angry about the diagnosis. Angry about... I gestured vaguely around the room, where David was visible in the kitchen, aggressively making himself a sandwich while clearly eavesdropping on our conversation. All of this. Claire had never particularly liked David, though she'd been polite about it. She thought he was condescending and controlling, but I'd always defended him. Now, seeing her take in his behavior over the weekend, I could practically watch her connecting the dots. Rebecca, she said carefully, when you told him about the diagnosis, what did he say? That I was being dramatic. Claire's face went very still. He said you were being dramatic about having cancer. Stage 4 cancer, Jessica added from the living room, where she was researching oncologists on her laptop. Terminal cancer. And he thinks that's dramatic? The way Claire said it, with such incredulous disbelief, made me realize how insane it sounded. Not just insensitive or dismissive, actually insane. That evening, after Claire had gone back to Milwaukee and Jessica had returned to school with promises to come home again the following weekend, I sat alone with David for the first time since the diagnosis. The apartment felt different somehow, smaller and stuffier, like the walls were closing in. "I'm glad everyone's calmed down," David said, settling in to watch Sunday night football. All that crying and carrying on wasn't helping anything. I stared at him from across the room. "David, I have terminal cancer." "You have treatable cancer," he corrected without looking away from the TV. "There's a difference. The doctor said some patients live for years. That's not exactly a cure. You're not some patients. You're you. You'll be fine." His absolute refusal to engage with the reality of my situation was breathtaking. It wasn't just denial, it was a complete invalidation of my experience, my fear, my right to be terrified about my own mortality. "What if I'm not fine?" I asked. "What if the treatment doesn't work?" "It will work. But what if it doesn't?" He finally looked at me, and I saw irritation flash across his face. "Rebecca, this negative thinking is exactly the problem. You're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy here. If you go into treatment expecting to fail, you probably will." "I'm not expecting to fail. I'm trying to have a realistic conversation about what might happen." "What might happen is that you'll do the chemo, you'll get better, and we'll move on with our lives. End of story." The certainty in his voice, the complete dismissal of any other possibility, was maddening. He wasn't just minimizing my diagnosis, he was erasing it entirely, rewriting it into something more convenient for him. "David, what if I die?" "You're not going to die." "But what if I do?" "You won't." "Answer the question," I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "What if I die?" He muted the TV and turned to face me fully, his expression exasperated. "Fine. If you want to play worst-case scenario games, here's your answer. You're not going to die because I won't let you. I don't accept that outcome. We'll get the best doctors, the best treatment, whatever it takes. But I'm not going to sit here and plan your funeral when you haven't even started treatment yet." On the surface, it sounded loving, devoted even. But underneath his words, I heard something else. His refusal to let me have my own experience of my own illness. This wasn't about supporting me through my fear. It was about controlling the narrative so that he didn't have to deal with the messy reality of loving someone who might die. "I need to be able to talk about being scared," I said quietly. "Why? What good does that do?" "Because I am scared. This is scary. And when I can't talk to my partner about being scared, I feel completely alone." "You're not alone. I'm right here." "But you won't let me feel what I'm feeling." He picked up the remote and unmuted the TV. "I won't let you wallow in negativity, if that's what you mean. That's not helpful for anyone." I sat there watching him watch football, feeling the weight of my diagnosis and the growing realization that I was facing it entirely alone. Not because I didn't have people who loved me, Jessica and Claire had made that abundantly clear, but because the person who was supposed to be my closest support was actively working against me accepting my own reality. That night, I couldn't sleep. The night sweats had gotten worse since the diagnosis, or maybe I was just more aware of them now that I knew what they meant. I lay in bed beside David, who slept peacefully despite the fact that his girlfriend had terminal cancer, and I stared at the ceiling thinking about the past 2 years. How many times had he told me I was being dramatic? How many of my feelings had been dismissed as overreactions? How many times had I doubted my own perceptions because he seemed so certain that I was wrong? I thought about the early days of our relationship, when his confidence had seemed attractive, reassuring even. He was so sure about everything: where to go for dinner, what movies to watch, how I should handle problems at work. I had found it refreshing after years of making all the decisions as a single mother. But somewhere along the way, his confidence had become control, and his certainty had become dismissal of anyone else's perspective. He didn't just think he knew better than me. He thought my feelings were wrong, my concerns were invalid, my experiences were incorrect. And now, faced with the biggest crisis of my life, he was telling me that my fear of dying from terminal cancer was just me being dramatic. I slipped out of bed and went to the kitchen, where I sat at the table with my laptop and began to research more than just treatment options. I started reading about relationships, about emotional support during serious illness, about what it meant to truly be there for someone facing their mortality. Everything I read made it clear that what I was experiencing with David wasn't normal. Partners of cancer patients were supposed to be scared too, to cry with them, to hold space for the reality of the situation. They weren't supposed to dismiss their loved one's fears as dramatic. As dawn broke over Lake Michigan, visible through our kitchen window, I made a decision. I had stage 4 cancer, and I might not have much time left. I wasn't going to spend whatever time I had left walking on eggshells around a man who thought my terminal diagnosis was me being dramatic. I was going to take control of my own story. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, with November wind rattling the windows of our Lincoln Park apartment. I had an appointment with Dr. Rodriguez to discuss treatment options, and for the first time since my diagnosis, I didn't ask David to come with me. "You sure you don't want me there?" he asked as he adjusted his tie in the bedroom mirror, getting ready for work. His tone suggested he was relieved rather than concerned. "I'm sure," I said, slipping on my coat. "I think I need to do this part alone." "Probably better anyway," he said, grabbing his briefcase. "I have back-to-back meetings all afternoon. Just remember what we talked about. Stay positive, focus on treatment. Don't get caught up in worst-case thinking." Even now, he was giving me instructions on how to handle my own cancer diagnosis. Dr. Rodriguez's office felt different when I walked in alone. Calmer somehow, like I could breathe more deeply without David's dismissive energy filling the room. She greeted me with the same kind professionalism, but I caught something in her expression that looked like relief. "How are you processing everything from Friday?" she asked as we settled into her office. "It's been complicated," I said. "I think I'm still in shock, but I'm also angry, which is weird." "Anger is actually very normal," she said gently. "What are you angry about?" I found myself telling her about David's reaction, about his insistence that I was being dramatic, about his complete dismissal of my fears. As I spoke, I watched her expression shift from professional concern to something approaching alarm. "Rebecca," she said when I finished, "how long has your partner been responding to your concerns this way?" "Pretty much always. But I thought, everyone deals with stress differently, right?" "Yes, but dismissing someone's legitimate health concerns isn't dealing with stress. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "It's concerning behavior, especially now when you're facing something this serious." She leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but firm. "You're going to need tremendous emotional support over the coming months. The treatment for your type of lymphoma is aggressive. You'll be dealing with intense chemotherapy, significant side effects, fatigue, nausea, hair loss. You need people around you who can hold space for how difficult this is going to be. And David isn't doing that. From what you've described, no, he's not." We spent the next hour going over treatment options. The plan was aggressive: 6 months of intensive chemotherapy, possibly followed by radiation. The side effects would be brutal, and there were no guarantees. With treatment, I might have years. Without it, I had months. "I want to start as soon as possible," I said. "Good. We'll begin next week." "But, Rebecca, I need you to think seriously about your support system. This treatment is going to be one of the hardest things you'll ever do. You need people who understand that and who can help you through it." As I left the medical building, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: clarity. Not about the cancer, that was still terrifying and overwhelming. But about David, about our relationship, about what I needed and deserved. I drove through downtown Chicago, past the office building where I worked, past the restaurant where David and I had our first date, past all the places that made up the geography of our relationship. Instead of going home, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a small cafe near Northwestern where Jessica and I used to go when she was in high school. I called her from my car. "Mom, how did the appointment go?" "It was good. Hard, but good." "Jess, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you were here this weekend, watching David, what did you think?" There was a pause, and I could practically hear her choosing her words carefully. "Mom, do you want me to be honest?" "Please." "I think he's an asshole. I think he's been an asshole for a long time, and having cancer doesn't make you dramatic for finally noticing it." Her bluntness was like a shock of cold water, clarifying and bracing. "He wasn't always like this," I said, though even as I said it, I wasn't sure it was true. Maybe not. But he's like this now when you need him most. And that's what matters. That afternoon, I called in sick to work and spent hours walking along the lakefront path, thinking. The November air was sharp and clean, and Lake Michigan stretched out endless and gray under the cloudy sky. I thought about the life I'd built, the choices I'd made, the person I'd become in relationship with David. I thought about the woman I'd been before I met him, confident in my own perceptions, trusting my instincts, unafraid to take up space with my feelings and needs. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost her, accepting instead that I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. But cancer isn't too much. Stage for lymphoma isn't too sensitive. The fear of dying at 40 years old isn't dramatic, it's human. When I got home that evening, David was in the kitchen making dinner, humming to himself like it was any other Monday. "How did the appointment go?" he asked without looking up from the stove. "We start treatment next week. Aggressive chemotherapy. 6 months, maybe longer." "See? I told you they'd have a plan. You'll be fine." I sat down at the kitchen table and watched him cook, this man who I'd shared a home with for 6 months, who I'd thought I might marry someday, who I'd believed loved me. He moved around the kitchen with easy confidence, seasoning and stirring, completely untroubled by the fact that his partner was facing months of brutal treatment for terminal cancer. "David, I need to talk to you about something." "Sure, what's up?" He was still focused on the stove, not really listening. "I need you to understand how serious this is. What I'm facing, what we're facing. I understand. You have cancer. You'll do chemo, you'll get better. I get it. But what if I don't get better?" He sighed, the sound sharp with irritation. "Rebecca, we've been through this. You're not going to die. I need you to stop with the negative thinking." "It's not negative thinking. It's reality. I have stage 4 cancer. Some people don't survive this." He turned around to face me, his expression exasperated. "Some people, yes, but not you. You're strong. You're healthy otherwise you're young. You'll be fine." "I'm 40 years old with terminal cancer. That's not young and healthy." "You're being dramatic again." The phrase hung in the air between us, and I felt something inside me finally snap into place. Not break, click, like a puzzle piece finding its proper position. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not." "Rebecca, I'm not being dramatic. I have cancer. I might die. Being scared about that isn't dramatic, it's normal. Needing support isn't too much to ask. It's basic human decency. And you calling me dramatic for having feelings about my own terminal illness isn't love or support, it's cruelty." David stared at me, clearly taken aback by the firmness in my voice. "I'm trying to help you stay positive. You're trying to avoid dealing with the reality of what's happening to me. Because if you actually acknowledged how serious this is, you might have to feel something uncomfortable yourself." "That's not." "Yes, it is." I stood up from the table, feeling stronger than I had in months. "Do you know what Dr. Rodriguez asked me today? She asked about my support system. She said I'm going to need people who can hold space for how difficult this treatment is going to be. People who understand that I'm facing something terrifying and who won't make me feel bad for being scared. I am supportive. You told me I was being dramatic about having cancer, David. Stage 4 cancer. You think my fear of dying is me overreacting. I think dwelling on worst-case scenarios isn't helpful. I think pretending this isn't serious is what's not helpful. I think dismissing my feelings is what's not helpful. I think making me feel like I'm asking for too much when I need emotional support for terminal cancer is what's not helpful. We stared at each other across the kitchen, and I saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not the confident, successful man I'd fallen for, but someone so uncomfortable with difficult emotions that he'd rather gaslight his partner than face them. So what are you saying? He asked. I'm saying I can't do this with you. I can't fight cancer and fight for the right to have feelings about cancer. I can't spend whatever time I have left walking on eggshells around someone who thinks my legitimate fears are dramatic overreactions. You're breaking up with me because I'm trying to keep you positive? I'm breaking up with you because you're not here for me. You're here for some version of me that doesn't feel scared or need support or take up space with inconvenient emotions. And that's not who I am, especially not now. The next morning, while David was at work, I packed my things. It didn't take long. I'd only moved in 6 months earlier, and I'd kept my old apartment as a home office. As I folded clothes and gathered books, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: relief. I was facing the scariest thing that had ever happened to me, but I was going to face it as myself, not as some diminished version of myself that had been trained not to feel too much. Jessica helped me move my things that afternoon, and as we carried boxes down to my car, she looked at me with something like pride. How do you feel? She asked. Terrified about the cancer, but not terrified about facing it alone anymore. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. You were alone anyway, Mom. At least now you don't have to pretend you're not. That evening, I sat in my own apartment for the first time in months, surrounded by my books and my furniture and my things. My phone buzzed with texts from David, confused, then angry, then pleading. But I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and began researching not just treatment options, but support groups, counseling services, resources for people facing terminal illness. I made lists of friends to call, family members to lean on, ways to build the support system I was going to need. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt like I could breathe. The next week, I started chemotherapy. Jessica took the train down from Northwestern to be with me for my first treatment, and Claire drove in from Milwaukee. We sat in the oncology center at Northwestern Memorial, watching the Ford drip poison into my veins that might save my life, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt genuinely supported. How are you feeling? Jessica asked, holding my hand as the chemo coursed through my system. Scared, I said honestly, but not alone. Good, Claire said from the chair beside my treatment recliner. You should be scared. This is scary, but you don't have to pretend it's not. That afternoon, as the three of us sat in my apartment eating soup and watching old movies, my phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen. You don't have to answer that, Jessica said, but I did answer it. I was curious what he would say, how he would try to spin this situation to make it about him being the reasonable one. Rebecca, this is insane, he said without preamble. You're going through chemo and you think now is the time to blow up your relationship? You need stability right now, not drama. I put the phone on speaker so Jessica and Claire could hear. David, I needed support and you couldn't provide it, so I found it elsewhere. I was supportive. I was trying to keep you positive. You told me I was being dramatic about having terminal cancer. I told you not to focus on worst-case scenarios. Same thing. There was a pause, and I could practically hear him recalibrating, trying to find a different angle. Look, Rebecca, I know I'm not perfect. Maybe I could have been more emotional about this. But breaking up right now doesn't make sense. You need someone to take care of you. I need someone who doesn't think my feelings are wrong. Fine, I can work on that. Come home, and we'll figure this out. David, I said, looking at Jessica and Claire, who were both watching me with expressions of fierce support. I am home, and I have figured it out. This is ridiculous. You're making decisions based on emotion instead of logic. I'm making decisions based on what I need to survive this. And what I need is to be around people who don't think my emotions are problems to be managed. So that's it. 2 years together, and you're throwing it away because I'm not crying enough about your diagnosis. The way he framed it, like I was asking for something unreasonable, like wanting emotional support during terminal illness was asking too much, confirmed everything I'd realized about him. I'm not throwing anything away, David. I'm choosing to spend whatever time I have left with people who actually love me. I do love you. You love the version of me that doesn't need anything from you. After I hung up, the three of us sat in silence for a while. Outside my apartment windows, Chicago was settling into evening, with lights coming on in windows across the city, people heading home to families who hopefully knew how to love each other better than David knew how to love me. I'm proud of you, Mom, Jessica said quietly. For what? Breaking up with my boyfriend while I have cancer? It seems pretty messy. For choosing yourself, Claire said. For refusing to accept being dismissed and minimized. For demanding better, even when I might not have much time left to enjoy better. Especially then, Jessica said fiercely. Especially then. Over the following weeks, as the chemotherapy began to work its brutal magic on my body, I learned what real support looked like. Jessica rearranged her class schedule to drive down twice a week. Claire took family leave from her job to help with appointments and grocery shopping. My colleagues at work organized meal trains and cleaning services. Friends I hadn't heard from in years reached out with offers of help, visits, and genuine concern. The contrast with David's response was stark. This was what it looked like when people actually cared about someone going through a crisis. They showed up, they listened, they held space for fear and sadness and uncertainty without trying to fix it or dismiss it. 3 months into treatment, my hair was gone and my weight had dropped even more, but the tumors were shrinking. Dr. Rodriguez was cautiously optimistic, using words like responding well and encouraging progress. I still had months of treatment ahead, and there were no guarantees about long-term survival, but for the first time since my diagnosis, the future felt like a possibility rather than a death sentence. One evening in February, as I sat in my apartment wearing the soft beanie Jessica had bought me to cover my bald head, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, David stood in the hallway holding flowers and wearing his most charming smile. "You look good," he said, which was obviously a lie. I looked like exactly what I was, a woman in the middle of aggressive cancer treatment. "What are you doing here, David?" "I wanted to see how you're doing. I heard through the grapevine that treatment is going well." "It is. I'm glad. I've been thinking about you a lot." He stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of his cologne, the same scent that used to make me feel safe and cared for, but now just smelled like dismissal and emotional unavailability. "I think I understand now what you were trying to tell me," he continued, "about needing support. I've been reading about it, about how to be there for someone with cancer." "Reading about it?" "Yeah, there are books, articles. I realize I probably didn't handle things the best way initially." I stared at him, this man who had needed to read books to understand that calling someone dramatic for having terminal cancer was hurtful. "David, do you remember what you said when I told you I might die?" "I said you weren't going to die. I was trying to be positive." "You said I was being dramatic." He paused, and I could see him trying to figure out how to reframe this in a way that made him look better. I was in shock. I didn't know how to process it. "So you made it my job to manage your shock by not being scared?" "That's not, maybe I could have handled it better." "Maybe." He shifted uncomfortably. And I realized that even now, even after months apart, even after everything that had happened, he still couldn't fully acknowledge what he'd done wrong. Look, Rebecca, I know I'm not perfect, but we were good together before all this happened. We could be good together again. Before all this happened, I was healthy and didn't need anything from you except dinner dates and weekend plans. Now I need actual emotional support, and you've already shown me you can't provide that. I can learn. I have been learning. From books. Yes, from books. What's wrong with that? Nothing's wrong with learning. But David, the fact that you needed a book to tell you not to call your girlfriend dramatic for having cancer, that tells me everything I need to know about your capacity for empathy. That's not fair. What's not fair is what you put me through when I was most vulnerable. What's not fair is that I had to choose between fighting cancer and fighting for the right to have feelings about cancer. He stood there in my doorway, still holding the flowers, looking genuinely confused about why his charm offensive wasn't working. I love you, he said finally. You love the idea of me. You love the version of me that existed to make your life easier and more pleasant. But you don't love me, the real me, with fears and needs and inconvenient emotions. Everyone has fears and needs. Yes, they do. And the people who love them hold space for those feelings instead of calling them dramatic. As I closed the door on David and his flowers, I felt something settle into place inside me. Not closure exactly, but clarity. I had learned something important about love during the worst crisis of my life. Real love doesn't ask you to be smaller, quieter, less needy. Real love doesn't call your legitimate fears dramatic. Real love shows up, especially when things get hard. 6 months later, I finished my last round of chemotherapy. The scans showed no evidence of disease, though Dr. Rodriguez cautioned that with my type of cancer, remission didn't mean cured. I would need regular monitoring for the rest of my life, however long that turned out to be. But I was alive and I was myself again, maybe more myself than I'd been in years. Jessica graduated from Northwestern that spring, and at her graduation party, surrounded by family and friends who had supported us through the hardest year of our lives, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: gratitude. Not gratitude for having cancer. I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone, but gratitude for what it had taught me about my own strength, about the difference between real love and the illusion of love, about the importance of refusing to accept less than I deserved. How do you feel? Claire asked me as we watched Jessica laugh with her college friends. Lucky, I said, which is weird considering. Lucky how? Lucky that I found out who I really was and who really loves me, while I still had time to do something about it. I looked around the room at all the people who had shown up for me during the darkest period of my life, not because it was easy or convenient, but because that's what love does. It shows up. And I thought about David, who I'd heard was dating someone new, someone who hopefully wouldn't need much from him emotionally. I felt something for him that wasn't quite forgiveness, but wasn't anger either, just a kind of sad understanding that some people simply don't have the capacity to love others through difficulty. But I did have that capacity, and more importantly, I was surrounded by people who had it too. The cancer might come back. The doctors couldn't promise it wouldn't. But whatever time I had left, whether it was months or years or decades, I was going to spend it with people who knew how to love me when I needed them most. And I was never again going to accept being called dramatic for having feelings about my own life. As I watched my daughter celebrate her achievements, healthy and strong and surrounded by love, I realized that maybe the most important thing I'd taught her through all of this wasn't about surviving cancer. Maybe it was about surviving the people who try to make you smaller. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from someone who can't love you the way you deserve to be loved, even when you're scared, even when you're vulnerable, even when walking away feels like the hardest thing in the world. Especially then.